The rain drummed a soft rhythm against the workshop skylight as Tilly Sims bent closer to her work, squinting through the dim September light. Her needle moved with practiced precision through the forest green wool, creating invisible stitches that would hold the riding habit's hem in place long after she herself was forgotten. It was the 3rd of September, 1821, late afternoon, and the world outside Hartwell's tailoring establishment had turned grey and hushed. Her hands, scarred from 1,000 careless pricks, calloused at the fingertips, perpetually marked with chalk dust that never quite washed away, moved without thought now. The measuring tape draped around her neck like a familiar yoke. The pincushion strapped to her wrist caught the weak light, its bristling surface a small armory always at the ready. This particular habit was for her cousin Arabella, Lady Pembridge now, who had married above her station 3 years ago and never let anyone forget it. Tilly had sewn that wedding gown too, with its yards of Belgian lace and seed pearls. What Arabella didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Tilly had stitched tiny songbirds into the innermost hem, each one facing a different direction, symbols of the freedom the bride would never have. It was Tilly's secret rebellion, her art that no one would ever see. She'd done the same for Charlotte, now Lady Thornbury, hiding constellations in the beading of her bodice, a map to somewhere else, anywhere else. And for Susanna, the Countess of Ashford, she'd embroidered an entire poem in thread so fine it was nearly invisible, words about longing and roads not taken that would press against her cousin's skin on her wedding day. 3 cousins, all married into the peerage, 3 magnificent gowns that had launched them into society's glittering circles, and Tilly remained here, in this cramped workshop that smelled of wool and sizing and the lamp oil that burned too long each day. She was 34 years old, handsome, some might say, though never pretty, too tall, too angular, with unremarkable brown hair she kept ruthlessly pinned back and features too strong for conventional beauty. She had her father's prominent nose and her mother's direct gaze, neither of which recommended her for the marriage market, even when she'd been of an age to enter it. Not that it mattered. She had her needle, her thread, her ability to create beauty for others. It was both her gift and her curse to make others shine while she remained invisible, the ghost behind the glory. But sometimes, in the quiet moments when the light slanted just so through the skylight, she wondered what it might feel like to be seen. Not as Tilly the seamstress, reliable Tilly who could fix any disaster, capable Tilly with her magic fingers, but as a woman worthy of attention in her own right, worthy of being chosen, being wanted, being. She shook her head sharply. Such thoughts led nowhere useful. The rain softened to mist against the glass, and Tilly was just reaching for her shears when footsteps sounded on the stairs. She looked up, surprised. Mr. Hartwell rarely ventured into the workroom himself, preferring to send messages through the shop boy. But there he stood in the doorway, his round face flushed with either exertion or excitement, she couldn't tell which. "Miss Sims," he was slightly breathless. "A matter requiring your immediate attention in the private fitting room. A commission of some delicacy." Tilly set down her work, careful not to let the needle catch. In 15 years at Hartwell's, she'd learned that delicacy could mean anything from a torn seam that needed invisible mending to a gentleman's mistress requiring a gown that wouldn't identify her dressmaker. "Of course, Mr. Hartwell." She wiped the chalk dust from her hands, futile, but she tried and removed her spectacles, polishing them on her apron before settling them back on her nose. The world sharpened into focus again. Without them, she could barely see her own stitches, but she'd learned long ago that clients preferred a seamstress who didn't squint at them like a mole emerging from underground. Following Mr. Hartwell down the narrow stairs, Tilly's mind was already cataloguing the contents of the storeroom. Late September meant the autumn orders would be coming in new walking dresses, warmer pelisses, riding habits for the hunting season. Perhaps this was a rush order from someone preparing to leave for a country estate. The private fitting room was at the back of the shop, away from the front windows where passers-by might glimpse clients in various states of undress. It was a small luxury Mr. Hartwell afforded his more distinguished customers, and Tilly had been summoned here often enough over the years for last-minute alterations and delicate repairs. Mr. Hartwell paused at the door, his hand on the knob. There was something odd in his expression, a kind of nervous anticipation she'd never seen before. "The client has been waiting," he said quietly. "I've explained you're our finest needlework specialist, that if anyone can accommodate this particular request, it would be you." Before Tilly could ask what the request might be, Mr. Hartwell opened the door, and there, Standing by the window with his back to them, silhouetted against the grey afternoon light, stood someone who made her heart perform an unexpected acrobatic feat in her chest. The man turned. "Hello, dear lovelies. If you're enjoying this tale of longing and invisible hearts, I'd be ever so grateful if you'd like or subscribe. It truly helps me bring you more stories woven with love and history. And if you're inclined, do tell me in the comments where you're reading from. I treasure every note, and they never fail to brighten my day." The man stood with his back to the window, examining a bolt of superfine wool Mr. Hartwell must have brought in for his inspection. He was tall, taller even than Tilly, which was rare enough with dark hair that wanted to curl despite being ruthlessly tamed. When he turned fully, she saw angular features that might have been carved from granite, and eyes the color of the sea before a storm, grey-green, restless, intelligent. She knew who he was instantly, though they'd never met. Everyone in London knew the Duke of Ashcroft, if only by reputation. James Wood, the man who'd killed 2 others in duels on the continent legally, but still. The Duke who'd broken an engagement by simply disappearing to Vienna for 3 years without explanation, who'd refused every matchmaking mama's attempts for the better part of a decade, who was rumoured to be brilliant, volatile, utterly ungovernable by society's rules, and he was standing in Mr. Hartwell's private fitting room, making the modest space feel suddenly small and charged with something like electricity. "Your Grace," Mr. Hartwell was saying, his voice pitched higher than usual, "may I present Miss Matilda Sims, our most accomplished needlework specialist. Miss Sims, His Grace the Duke of Ashcroft." Tilly curtsied automatically, deeply, keeping her eyes lowered as was proper, but she could feel his gaze on her direct, assessing, uncomfortably thorough. For the first time in years, she felt suddenly, terrifyingly visible. "Miss Sims," his voice was deeper than she'd expected, with a slight roughness to it. "Mr. Hartwell tells me you're the only person in London who might accommodate my request. I shall certainly endeavour to do so, Your Grace." Her own voice came out steady, professional, years of practice. "What manner of commission did you have in mind?" He set down the bolt of wool and turned to face her fully, those storm-coloured eyes fixed on hers, and she forced herself not to look away. "I require a new wardrobe entirely," he said, "but more importantly, I require someone who understands that clothing should reveal character rather than conceal it." The statement hung in the air between them. Tilly's fingers tightened around the measuring tape still draped around her neck. This was not a normal request. Gentlemen came to establishments like Hartwell's because they wanted to look like every other gentleman, safe, conventional, unremarkable save for the quality of their tailoring. He was asking for something else entirely. He was asking her to see him, truly see him, and translate that into fabric and form. The intimacy of it made her breath catch. "That's quite a different philosophy than most of your peers hold, Your Grace," she managed. "I've never been much concerned with what my peers think." A slight curve to his mouth, not quite a smile. "Tell me, Miss Sims, what is your philosophy of tailoring? Why do you do this work?" The question caught her off guard. In 15 years, no client had ever asked her such a thing. They asked about fabric weights, button styles, whether cuffs should be turned back or sewn flat. Never why. "I believe," she said slowly, surprising herself with her honesty, "that what we wear is a kind of language, a way of speaking without words. Every seam, every cut, every choice of color tells something about who we are or who we wish to be." He nodded, that intense focus never wavering. "And what do most people wish to say? That they belong, that they're safe, that they won't cause trouble or draw unwanted attention. And what do you wish to say, Miss Sims?" The question was so unexpected, so personal, that she nearly stepped back. But something in his expression, genuine curiosity, not mockery, held her in place. "I'm the seamstress, Your Grace. No one asks what I wish to say. I'm asking." The room felt smaller still. Mr. Hartwell had quietly retreated to hover near the door, clearly sensing this conversation had moved beyond his understanding. "Perhaps," Tilly said carefully, "that there is artistry in precision, beauty in function, that invisible things can matter most." Something shifted in his expression, recognition perhaps. "Yes," he said quietly, "exactly that." She found herself measuring him without quite meaning to, her professional eye cataloguing the breadth of his shoulders, the length of his arms, the way he held himself with a kind of coiled energy even standing still. He caught her looking and raised one dark eyebrow. "Should we begin, Miss Sims? I assume you'll need measurements." Yes, Your Grace. She cleared her throat, summoning her professional composure like armor. If you could remove your coat, please. He shrugged out of it with easy grace, and Tilly stepped forward with her measuring tape, hyper-aware suddenly of how close she'd need to stand, how her hands would need to span his shoulders, circle his chest, measure the length of his arms. She'd done this 1,000 times with countless clients. It had never felt like this, like crossing some invisible threshold into dangerous territory. His eyes followed her movements as she worked, noting everything with that same unsettling intensity. When her fingers brushed his shoulder blade, adjusting the tape, she felt him go very still. "You're very focused," he observed. "Most people find it difficult to concentrate when I'm watching them. I'm accustomed to being watched while I work, Your Grace, though usually with less attention." Perhaps they weren't paying proper attention. She recorded the measurement in her notebook with fingers that wanted to tremble, then moved to measure his sleeve length. "When would Your Grace require the first garments?" "I'll return in 3 days for the initial fitting. Will that suffice?" "Perfectly, Your Grace." When she'd finished and stepped back, he collected his coat, but didn't immediately put it on. Instead, he regarded her with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see past all her carefully constructed invisibility. "I look forward to our next conversation, Miss Sims. I find your perspective refreshing." Then he was gone, following Mr. Hartwell out, leaving only the faint scent of sandalwood and something else, bergamot, perhaps lingering in the air. Tilly sank onto the fitting room's single chair, her hands finally giving in to the tremor she'd suppressed. She stared at her notebook where she'd recorded his measurements in her careful script. "Don't be foolish," she told herself firmly. "He's a duke, you're a seamstress." He was simply being courteous, but hope, that dangerous, foolish thing, had already taken root somewhere behind her ribs, and she couldn't quite bring herself to tear it out. September slipped into early October, and the Duke of Ashcroft became a fixture at Hartwell's establishment. He returned 3 times per week, far more frequently than any wardrobe commission required, no matter how extensive. He always requested Tilly specifically, waiting if she was occupied with another client, declining Mr. Hartwell's offers to assign the work elsewhere. Mr. Hartwell noticed, of course, but a duke's regular patronage was excellent for business, and he said nothing beyond ensuring the private fitting room was always available when His Grace arrived. The pattern of their visits took on a rhythm Tilly came to anticipate, with equal parts anticipation and trepidation. On his first return, while she fitted a waistcoat of charcoal wool, he asked her opinion on the parliamentary reform bills currently being debated, not as small talk, but genuinely interested in her thoughts on representation and suffrage. She found herself arguing that reform should extend beyond property owners, her pins held between her lips, her hands steady, even as her pulse quickened at the intellectual engagement. The second week, they debated the merit of the new gaslight installations appearing throughout London. He favored the modernity. She defended the warm glow of oil lamps, arguing that progress shouldn't obliterate all that was beautiful about the past. He'd laughed, actually laughed, and conceded her point about the quality of light. By the third week, they were arguing about Byron's poetry, genius or melodrama. He defended the passion. She countered that true feeling didn't require such theatrical expression. They were still debating when she'd finished the final adjustments to his morning coat, neither willing to concede defeat. He challenged her opinions but never dismissed them, treated her thoughts as having weight and value, worthy of engagement and consideration. It was intoxicating in a way Tilly had never experienced. The revelation moment came during his 4th visit, while she was measuring him for yet another morning coat. This one, a deep blue superfine, he claimed he needed for estate business, though they both knew he could wear any of the 3 she'd already completed. "I saw Lady Pembridge at the theatre last week," he mentioned casually. "She was wearing that green riding habit. Remarkable workmanship." Tilly murmured her thanks, focusing on the measuring tape. "There are birds hidden in the embroidery at the hem," he continued. "I noticed them when she bent to adjust her skirts." "Why birds?" Her hands stilled on the tape. She looked up to find him watching her with that penetrating focus that seemed to strip away all her careful defenses. "She once told me," Tilly said slowly, "that she felt caged during her first engagement, the one she broke before meeting Lord Pembridge. The birds are for freedom," a reminder that she chose this. The silence stretched between them, weighted with meaning she didn't dare examine too closely. "You see people," James said finally, his voice low and intent. "You see what they need, what they're afraid of, what they hope for, and you help them transform. give them armor or wings or whatever they require to become who they need to be. That is not merely tailoring, Miss Sims, that is artistry of the highest order. Something in her chest cracked open, bleeding warmth she couldn't contain. No one had ever understood that before. No one had ever seen past the craft to the intention beneath it. Your Grace, James, he said quietly, when we're alone, I should very much like you to call me James. She couldn't. The intimacy of it terrified her. So she said nothing, just recorded his measurement with shaking hands and stepped away before she did something foolish like weep. After that, he began bringing things. A volume of Wordsworth he thought she'd enjoy, opinion pieces clipped from newspapers, asking her thoughts on everything from crop rotation to criminal justice reform. He told her about his estate in Derbyshire, the responsibilities that weighed on him, the loneliness of a position where everyone wanted something from him, where genuine conversation was rarer than diamonds. She found herself waiting for his visits, organizing her work schedule around Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, marking time by the sound of his footsteps on the stairs, the way her heart performed that now familiar leap when he appeared in the doorway. Every night, she warned herself not to hope, reminded herself of her place, her age, her ordinariness. She was 34 years old, a seamstress with needle-scarred hands and no fortune, no beauty, no family connections worth mentioning. He was a duke, a man who could have his pick of society's most eligible young ladies. But hope, treacherous thing, grew despite her best efforts. It wound through her ribs like morning glory vines, beautiful and invasive and impossible to uproot without destroying something essential. She began to wonder, what if his attention meant something beyond intellectual curiosity? What if he saw her not as the invisible seamstress but as a woman worthy of... She never let herself complete that thought. It was too dangerous, too vast, too likely to shatter her into pieces when reality inevitably reasserted itself. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by a footman in livery. She recognized immediately her Aunt Philippa's household. Tilly held the creamy envelope with its perfect penmanship, feeling dread settle in her stomach like stones. The monthly family dinner, Belgrave Square. The whole family would be there, Aunt Philippa presiding, Arabella and Charlotte and Susanna with their titled husbands, everyone gleaming with success and satisfaction. She'd been avoiding these dinners for 3 months now, making excuses about work deadlines and imaginary ailments. But 3 months of absence would cause scandal, invite questions she didn't want to answer. Aunt Philippa's patience had limits, and this summons, for that's what it was, despite the polite phrasing, made those limits clear. She would have to go, would have to sit at that table and smile while her cousins catalogued their triumphs and their titled circles, their balls and their country house weekends, would have to endure their pitying glances and carefully worded questions about whether Mr. Hartwell was treating her well, whether she'd considered perhaps finding a position as a lady's companion instead, would have to pretend that she hadn't spent the last month falling in love with a man so far above her station that even hoping was an act of hubris. Tilly set the invitation on her work table and picked up her needle. Work was the only remedy she knew. For this kind of pain, the anticipatory grief of losing something she'd never actually had. The evening of October 14th found Tilly standing on the steps of her Aunt Philippa's elegant Belgrave Square townhouse, smoothing the skirts of her serviceable grey dress. Through the lit windows, she could see the glitter of crystal, the warm glow of beeswax candles, the promise of warmth and plenty within. She should have worn something better. But this was her best dress, and even it looked shabby compared to what awaited inside. Arabella received her in the drawing-room wearing rose silk that shimmered like dawn light, her dark curls perfectly arranged. Charlotte glowed in sapphire that matched her eyes, diamonds at her throat. Susanna, radiant with her second pregnancy, wore emerald that made her complexion luminous. Their husbands stood by the fire, Lord Pembridge with his comfortable prosperity, Lord Thornbury with his country squire confidence, the Earl of Ashford with his ancient title and older money. Tilly felt immediately like a shadow at a table of candles. Dinner was everything she'd anticipated. Arabella recounted her presentation at court with breathless detail, the Prince Regent's witticisms, the gowns, the scandal of Lady Jersey's latest protégé. Charlotte described a hunting party at Lord Thornbury's estate, where she'd impressed everyone with her horsemanship. Susanna spoke of nursery preparations and how blessed she felt to be fulfilling her duty so thoroughly. Aunt Philippa presided over it all with triumphant approval, a general surveying successful campaigns. Tilly cut her roast lamb into precise pieces and contributed occasional murmurs of agreement. The familiar pattern of invisibility settled over her like an old cloak. She'd perfected the art of being present but unnoticed, there but not requiring acknowledgement. It should have been bearable. She'd endured worse. But the wine flowed freely, and tongues loosened, and Arabella had always possessed sharp eyes beneath her rose silk prettiness. "Cousin," she said suddenly, her gaze fixed on Tilly with predatory interest. "You look different lately, almost hopeful. Have you taken on an especially lucrative commission?" Every instinct screamed at Tilly to deflect, to murmur something vague. But weeks of James's attention had weakened her defenses, made her forget her place. "I've been working extensively with the Duke of Ashcroft," she said, and even managed a small smile. "He's been most particular in his requirements, and most generous with his time." The silence that fell was absolute. Even the servants hovering with wine decanters seemed to freeze. Charlotte's laugh broke the stillness, bright, crystalline, cruel. "Working with the Duke's household, surely you mean? Everyone knows James Wood doesn't concern himself with tailors. He has people for that sort of thing." "No," Tilly said, feeling the trap close around her even as she spoke. "He comes himself. 3 times a week. We discuss, that is, he asks my opinion on—" "Dear Tilly," Susanna's voice dripped poisonous concern, "you must be careful not to mistake courtesy for genuine interest. Men of rank are polite to tradespeople. It's simply good breeding. It means nothing beyond that." Lord Pembridge shifted uncomfortably. "Ashcroft's a queer fish, Miss Sims, eccentric as they come. Wouldn't put too much stock in his attentions, probably just amusing himself." But it was Aunt Philippa who delivered the killing blow, her words surgical in their precision. "Matilda." The use of her full name was ominous. "At your age and in your position, you cannot afford fantasies." Tilly's hands tightened on her cutlery. "The Duke of Ashcroft is notorious for his disregard of convention, but even he would not seriously consider a match with a spinster seamstress of 34 years. Each word landed like a stone. "You have no fortune, no family consequence beyond what we've provided, no youth, no beauty that would recommend you to a man of his station. Aunt Philippa, I forbid you to entertain such delusions." Her aunt's voice cut like glass. "You will embarrass us all. Have you considered what scandal would attach to our family if you pursued this folly? If word spread that you'd made yourself ridiculous over a duke?" The table had gone silent again, everyone studiously avoiding Tilly's gaze except Arabella, who watched with something like satisfaction. "I see." Tilly's voice came from very far away. She stood, her napkin falling to the floor. "Forgive me. I find I'm not well. I should go." "But the syllabub," Susanna began. Tilly was already moving toward the door, her composure held together by pure will. She heard Aunt Philippa's sharp intake of breath, Charlotte's whispered comment to her husband, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. If she stayed another moment, she would shatter entirely, and they would see. The October night was cold against her face as she walked. Gas lamps created pools of yellow light along the streets, and the city smelled of coal smoke and rain coming. Her feet carried her automatically toward the shop, toward the cramped rooms above where she could be alone with her humiliation. By the time she climbed the narrow stairs, the poison had done its thorough work. Every memory of James's visits now seemed suspect. His intellectual respect, was it merely sophisticated condescension? The pleasure he seemed to take in their conversations, was she performing as an interesting curiosity for a bored aristocrat? His request that she call him by his Christian name, had that been a test to see how far above herself she would reach? Aunt Philippa was right. She was 34, unremarkable, a tradeswoman with nothing to recommend her beyond skilled fingers and an eye for line and form. What possible interest could a duke have in such a woman beyond the momentary entertainment of novelty? Tilly sat in her dark workshop, not bothering to light the candles. The half-finished coat for James hung on the dress form, deep blue superfine that she'd chosen because it would make his storm-colored eyes even more striking. She'd been measuring him, touching him, standing close enough to catch his scent, and all the while he'd probably been amused by her transparent hope. By the spinster seamstress who'd forgotten her place so thoroughly that she'd imagined— No, she couldn't even finish the thought. She would need to create distance, must protect herself before the inevitable rejection came, before he grew bored and moved on to more suitable pursuits. Better to withdraw now with some dignity and tact than wait to be discarded. "I have been a fool," she whispered to the darkness. Again. When James arrived for his next appointment, Tilly had rebuilt her walls, brick by careful brick. "Good afternoon, Your Grace," she said without meeting his eyes. "If you'll remove your coat, we'll check the sleeve length on the waistcoat." She kept her voice professional, her movements efficient. When he asked her opinion on the morning's parliamentary proceedings, she murmured, "I'm sure you know best, Your Grace." When he mentioned a book he thought she'd enjoy, she said only, "How kind," and returned to her pinning. He noticed immediately. "What has happened?" "Nothing, Your Grace." Her hands remained steady. "Simply busy with commissions." But his storm-colored eyes tracked her every careful movement, and she could feel his confusion like a physical weight in the small room. The second visit was worse. He persisted, trying to draw her into conversation about a poem he'd read, about architectural plans for a new bridge across the Thames, about anything that might make her look at him the way she used to. "You've retreated from me," he said finally, frustration bleeding into his voice. "Why?" "I don't know what you mean, Your Grace." She kept her eyes on the hem she was marking. "If you could stand still, please." "Matilda." "Miss Sims, Your Grace, it's more appropriate." The silence that followed felt dangerous, but she didn't break it, couldn't. If she looked at him, if she let herself hope again, the next shattering would destroy her entirely. By the third visit, on October 19th, James's patience had clearly worn through. He arrived for the final fitting of his morning coat, the deep blue superfine that had seemed so full of promise when she'd selected it. Mr. Hartwell showed him to the fitting room, but before Tilly could follow, James said calmly, "That will be all, Mr. Hartwell. Miss Sims and I require privacy." "Your Grace, I don't think." "Thank you, Mr. Hartwell." It wasn't a request. The shopkeeper withdrew, and James closed the door behind him, improper, scandalous, but he clearly didn't care. Tilly stood frozen by the dress form, measuring tape clutched in white-knuckled hands. "Tell me what I've done to offend you," James said quietly. "You've done nothing, Your Grace." She forced herself to meet his gaze, though it cost her. "But I think it best we maintain appropriate boundaries." "Appropriate boundaries?" He repeated the words as if tasting poison. "What does that mean?" This was the moment. She could end it cleanly, with dignity intact. Tilly drew a careful breath. "I am a tailor. Your Grace, you are a duke. We have had pleasant conversations, but I would not wish to presume they mean more than courtesy." Each word felt like pulling stitches from flesh. "My family has reminded me of my place. I am grateful for the reminder." She turned to the coat hanging on the form, running her fingers along a seam. "When your wardrobe is complete, I'm sure you'll have no further need of Hartwell's services. Your family." The fury in his voice made her look up sharply, but it wasn't directed at her. His face was dark with anger at someone else. "What did they say to you?" "It doesn't matter." "It clearly does." He moved closer, and she forced herself not to retreat. "Did they tell you I was being kind, condescending, amusing myself with the quaint seamstress?" Her silence was answer enough. "Christ!" He dragged a hand through his hair, destroying its careful arrangement. "Matilda, look at me, please." She did, helplessly. "I have spent 2 months finding excuses to see you," he said, each word deliberate, weighted. "I have commissioned clothing I don't need because I wanted an hour in your presence. I have shared thoughts with you. I've shared with no one, not friends, not family, no one. And you believe this is courtesy?" Her heart was doing that terrible acrobatic thing again, hope rising despite her best efforts to crush it. "Your Grace." "I am courting you, Matilda." The declaration landed between them like a stone in still water. "Have been since September. I thought I'd been obvious about it, but perhaps I should have been more direct." She shook her head, words failing. This couldn't be real. Men like him didn't court women like her. "Please don't say such things." Her voice broke. "It's cruel." "Cruel? I know what I am. My mirror shows me daily. 34, unremarkable, a tradeswoman with scarred hands and no prospects. You could have anyone." He crossed the space between them in 2 strides and took her hands, both of them, holding them firmly despite her instinct to pull away. It was the first time he'd touched her beyond the necessary contact of measurements, and the warmth of his skin against hers made thought difficult. "Then your mirror is a liar," he said fiercely. "It shows you none of what I see." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to. But decades of being overlooked, dismissed, relegated to shadows, those lessons ran too deep. "I can't," the words caught in her throat. "I can't afford to be wrong about this." Something shifted in his expression. Understanding, perhaps, and determination. Then I will prove it to you, he said quietly. However long it takes, whatever I must do, I will prove that I see you, Matilda Sims, and what I see is extraordinary. He released her hands slowly, as if reluctant to break the contact. But I need you to give me the chance. Then he left, taking his coat, leaving her standing alone in the fitting room, with her hands still warm from his touch, and her heart threatening to crack open despite all her careful defenses. She wanted desperately to believe him. But Aunt Philippa's words echoed in the silence. You cannot afford fantasies. The question was, which would prove more dangerous, believing in impossible things, or refusing to believe when the impossible might actually be real? The morning of October 21st dawned grey and cold. Tilly was already at her work table when Mr. Hartwell climbed the stairs to her workshop, his face grave, a newspaper clutched in his hands. Miss Sims, he hesitated in the doorway. I think you should see this before anyone else mentions it. Her hands trembled as she took the town tatler. The society column was prominently placed on page 3, impossible to miss. The words blurred as she forced herself to read. Details of the Duke of Ashcroft's peculiar attachment to spinster tailor of advancing years. Sources expressing bewilderment at his unprecedented interest in Miss Matilda Sims, 34, a seamstress of no particular distinction save skill with a needle. But worse, far worse, were the quotes that followed. Lord Edmund Carstairs. One wonders if Ashcroft has developed a taste for charity cases. The woman is past her prime and possesses neither beauty nor breeding. Sir Nicholas Weatherby. Perhaps the Duke finds novelty in slumming among the working classes. It's the sort of eccentricity one expects from Ashcroft. The Honourable George Finch Hatton. I hesitate to speak indelicately, but one must wonder if the arrangement is of a less honourable nature than courtship. What else could explain such attention to a woman so thoroughly unsuitable? Captain Marcus Delaney. It's an insult to every proper young lady of good family. These working women should know their place and not aspire above their station. Mr. Reginald Lockhart. No woman of 34 with needle-worn hands should presume to aspire to a duchess's coronet. The Duke's family must be mortified by this folly. Every fear she'd harboured, every doubt Aunt Philippa had planted, all confirmed in print for London, to consume over breakfast. Her name, her age, her unworthiness detailed for everyone to see and mock. And she recognized those names, every single one. Carstairs had courted Arabella before Lord Pembridge. Weatherby had proposed to Charlotte and been refused. Finch Hatton was one of Susanna's rejected suitors before the Earl. Delaney had danced with all 3 cousins last season. Lockhart's sister had married into Aunt Philippa's social circle. Her family had done this, had weaponized their connections to publicly humiliate her, to ensure James understood the scandal of associating with her. Miss Sims? Mr. Hartwell's voice seemed to come from very far away. Is there anything? Please leave me, she managed. When she was alone, Tilly sat very still, the newspaper crumpled in her lap. This was what came of reaching above her station. This was the price of hope. She couldn't allow James to be mocked further. Couldn't let him ruin himself defending her honor when she had none to defend. Whatever he thought, he felt curiosity, kindness, that inexplicable something he'd claimed it couldn't be worth this. With shaking hands, she found paper and ink. Your Grace, I release you from any understanding between us. Please do not call again. M.S. Brief. Final. She sealed it and summoned the shop boy, pressing coins into his palm. Grosvenor Square, immediately. James was in his study when his man of business brought the newspaper. He read it once, his expression growing colder with each line. Then he read it again, this time with the careful attention he'd once given battlefield reports during his years on the continent. 5 men, 5 calculated insults, each one designed to destroy Matilda's reputation while positioning him as either fool or villain. He felt no embarrassment, only rage, the kind that burned cold and clear, sharpening thought rather than clouding it. Someone had insulted what was his. That could not stand. Summons my secretary, he said quietly, and my second, immediately. Within the hour, he was dictating 5 identical letters, his secretary's pen scratching rapidly across vellum. Sir, your comments regarding Miss Matilda Sims in this morning's town tatler constitute an actionable insult to a lady under my protection. I demand satisfaction. My second will call upon you within the hour to arrange particulars. All 5 to be fought the same morning, October 23rd. Hampstead Heath, dawn. Let London see what happened to men who dared insult her. He was sealing the final challenge when Tilly's note arrived. His secretary handed it over wordlessly, and James broke the seal, reading her careful script. He laughed a sound without humor, only iron determination. "She thinks to protect me," he murmured. "How extraordinary." He added a postscript to the final challenge in his own hand. "This is not negotiable." By afternoon, news had spread through London like wildfire. The Duke of Ashcroft had challenged 5 gentlemen to duels. 5. In a single morning. No one could remember such a thing. Whites hummed with speculation, bets placed on outcomes, debates over whether it was madness or magnificent arrogance. Tilly heard the rumors from customers who came to collect orders, their voices pitched low with scandalous delight. 5 men, all because of that seamstress. He'll be killed, surely. No one survives 5 duels. She sat frozen at her work table, needle motionless in her hand. He would be killed because of her. Because she'd been foolish enough to hope, visible enough to draw attention, presumptuous enough to imagine she could be anything more than the invisible seamstress. "Dear God," she whispered to the empty workshop, "what have I done?" October 22nd dawned grey and cold, finding Tilly hollow-eyed from a sleepless night. She tried to eat breakfast, but the bread turned to ash in her mouth. By the time weak sunlight filtered through her window, she'd made her decision. She would beg, would offer any abasement, any apology. Her pride meant nothing weighed against James's life. Lord Carstairs maintained fashionable rooms in Street James. Tilly arrived at 8 in the morning, shockingly early, deeply improper, and knocked before courage could desert her. He answered the door himself, clearly between servants. His expression shifted from surprise to something ugly and satisfied. "Miss Sims." "How?" "Unexpected." His gaze traveled over her with deliberate insolence. "Do come in." The insinuation in his voice made her skin crawl, but she stepped inside. "Lord Carstairs, I've come to beg you to withdraw your acceptance of the Duke's challenge." The words rushed out. "The insult was to me. I freely forgive it. There's no need for—" His laugh cut her off, cruel, without humor. "You flatter yourself thinking this duel is about you, Miss Sims." He circled her like a predator. "The Duke needs no excuse to demonstrate his superior skill with pistols. He's simply using your little scandal as justification. Then you'll withdraw? And be called coward?" His smile turned vicious. "I think not. Besides, perhaps the Duke will tire of his little seamstress once he's proven his point with pistols. Where will you be then? Notorious and ruined. Not suitable even for your needle and thread." Tilly backed toward the door, understanding her terrible mistake. She'd given him ammunition to use against them both. Carstairs called after her as she fled down the stairs. "See you at Hampstead Heath if you wish to watch your lover bleed for your presumption." She emerged onto the street, tears blurring her vision. The plan to visit the other 4 men died in her chest. She'd made everything worse, given them all, proof of her desperation, her presumption, her unworthiness. By 9 o'clock, she'd returned to Hartwell's, trembling and hollow. Rebecca Montague was waiting in the shop, a modest friend of Mr. Hartwell's, who'd known Tilly for years. She took one look at Tilly's face and guided her firmly to the private workroom. "Tell me," Rebecca said simply. The story poured out the failed attempt with Carstairs, the growing certainty that James would die because she'd been foolish enough to hope above her station. "I'm not worth the cost of his honor," Tilly whispered. "Not worth his life." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, her lined face thoughtful. "I've known the Duke of Ashcroft for 10 years. Made clothing for various women in his life, though never a wife. He never came close to marrying anyone." She took Tilly's scarred hands in her own. "I've watched him move through society with restless dissatisfaction, a man who had everything except what mattered, someone who saw past his title and reputation to the person beneath. Rebecca, I've observed him during his visits here these past months, seen something in his face when he looks at you that I've never seen before." Her voice was gentle but firm, softness, hope, wonder, as if he can't believe his good fortune in finding you. Tilly shook her head, but Rebecca continued, "He's not a fool or a madman, Tilly. He's a man who finally found what he's been searching for, and he won't give it up regardless of what society thinks or what dangers he faces." The words settled into Tilly's chest, finding purchase in the raw places. "Your belief that you're unworthy is precisely the thinking men like Carstairs rely on," Rebecca said quietly. "It keeps women in their place, accepting crumbs, never reaching for more. If you truly love James, you owe him the courtesy of believing he knows his own mind. that his love is real and his choice deliberate. She squeezed Tilly's hands. Most importantly, you owe him the trust to let him fight if that's what he chooses. To deny him that right is to treat him as a child who can't make his own decisions, rather than as a man who's weighed the costs and found you worth any price. But if he's killed, the 5 men he'll face are skilled, but driven only by wounded pride. James will be fighting for love. That makes all the difference. Rebecca's smile was small but certain. A man fighting for love won't permit himself to lose. Tilly sat absorbing the words, feeling something shift in her chest, a movement away from self-doubt toward belief. Her insistence on unworthiness wasn't humility. It was pride, the arrogant certainty that she knew better than James what he should want. If she truly respected him, she must respect his choice, must believe him when he said she was worthy. When he returns, Tilly said slowly, testing the words, I won't doubt him again. I'll accept his love. I'll step into whatever role he offers with whatever courage I can summon. Rebecca smiled, squeezing her hands. This is wisdom. This is you truly understanding your own worth. They sat together as afternoon faded to evening, and Tilly felt quiet resolution settle in her heart. Tomorrow, whatever came, she would face it as a woman who'd learned to believe she deserved to be loved. The morning of October 23rd arrived with cruel clarity, sky pale, blue and cloudless, as if nature refused to acknowledge the violence about to unfold. Tilly woke in Rebecca's spare room, where her friend had insisted she spend the night. If you're to wait for news of his fate, Rebecca had said while helping her dress in deep blue muslin, do so looking like the Duchess you're about to become. Now they sat in Rebecca's kitchen, tea cooling untouched between them. Neither could eat. Francis Caster sent word last night, Rebecca said quietly. James is second. The duels begin at dawn on Hampstead Heath. Each man in succession, 30 minutes between to allow the surgeon time and the field to be cleared. Tilly's hands trembled around her teacup. Did he say, James requested you not attend, said he couldn't focus properly if he was worried about you witnessing the violence, so she could only wait. And wonder. The morning light grew stronger, spilling through the window in golden bars. Even now, James might be standing across a field from Carstairs, pistol in hand, waiting for the command to fire. Rebecca talked steadily about inconsequential things, a difficult customer, a new fabric shipment, but Tilly barely heard. The clock ticked with excruciating slowness. She counted each tick, trying to calculate how long did a duel take. Minutes for the men to take positions. Seconds between the command and the shots. How long before they'd know if he was hurt or whole? Which of the 5 was the best shot? Did any of them feel regret now for their published insults? Did they understand they'd forced a reckoning not just with James, but with their own cruelty? She prayed wordlessly, constantly. Let him return unharmed. Rebecca reached across the table and took her hand. He's the finest shot I've ever heard of. He'll come back to you, has too much to live for to permit any other outcome. Tilly held tight to those words like a lifeline. At 11 o'clock, commotion erupted from the street below. Tilly heard Francis Caster's voice, exhausted but triumphant. It's over, and the Duke is unharmed. Her knees buckled. She sat suddenly on the bottom step of Rebecca's stairs, the room tilting around her. Francis appeared in the doorway and knelt beside her, looking into her face with rough emotion. 5 duels, Miss Sims. All finished. His voice was hoarse with fatigue. Lord Carstairs shot first at dawn, bullet past the Duke's left ear. His Grace waited, aimed with perfect control, and shot Carstairs through the shoulder. Not fatal, but Carstairs dropped his pistol and fell to his knees. Tilly couldn't speak, could only listen. Sir Nicholas Weatherby at 6:30, his shot went wide, nerves after seeing Carstairs fall. The Duke hit him in the upper arm, clean through. Then Finch Hatton at 7, who grazed the Duke's coat but nothing more. His Grace shot him in the side, passed clean through. No vital organs struck. Captain Delaney was steady, a military man. Best shot of the 5. He drew first blood, a crease across the Duke's shoulder, but his Grace never flinched, just shot Delaney in the thigh, took 2 men to carry the captain off. Francis's smile turned grim. Mr. Lockhart was last, shaking so badly his shot went into the ground 3 feet short. The Duke put a bullet through his right hand, deliberate. Can't hold a pistol or pen for months. Can't write more insults. He could have killed them, Tilly whispered. Everyone. But he chose mercy. Public demonstration that insults against you would meet devastating consequences. But he's not a murderer. Francis paused. After the final duel, He stood in the center of the field with the smoke still clearing and addressed the 30 witnesses, all men of rank and influence. What did he say? That Matilda Sims is under his protection and will soon be his duchess. That any man who questions your worth or speaks against your honor will answer to him personally. That he'll be pleased to meet as many challenges as society cares to provide, because he'll never tire of defending the woman he loves. Tears spilled down Tilly's cheeks. Absolute silence after that, Francis continued. Then, one by one, the witnesses nodded. I watched the social calculation happen in real time. They recognized that opposing the Duke's choice was both dangerous and futile. He'd drawn a line in blood and dared anyone to cross it. Where is he now? On his way to you. Stopped home only to wash and change clothes, see the surgeon bind his shoulder, sent me ahead to tell you he's safe and begs you to wait for him. Francis's smile turned knowing. Prepare yourself, Miss Sims. He intends to take you directly to obtain a special license. We'll brook no further delays or doubts. Fought 5 duels before noon, and he'll marry you before week's end if you'll have him. Tilly laughed through her tears. I'd have him today if it could be arranged. Would marry him this very hour. I've learned life is too precious and love too rare to waste another moment in fear or hesitation. Then I suggest you prepare yourself, Miss Sims. Francis stood, offering his hand to help her rise. Because the Duke of Ashcroft is a remarkably determined man, and I suspect you'll be a duchess sooner than you think. Within the hour, his carriage pulled up outside. Tilly watched from the workshop window as James emerged still in his morning clothes, cravat slightly askew, the most disheveled she'd ever seen him, which somehow made him more human, more real. She rushed downstairs before he could enter the shop. They met on the pavement, London's afternoon traffic flowing around them, passers-by staring. Neither cared. He stopped 3 feet away and just looked at her. Matilda. Her name was a prayer, a claim, a promise. She crossed the distance between them. I'm sorry I doubted you. I'm sorry I tried to protect you from your own choice. I'm sorry I didn't believe I was worth fighting for. His hands framed her face, public, improper, perfect. And now? Now I believe you. Now I understand that being seen by the right person is worth more than being admired by everyone else. She managed a trembling smile. Now I'm ready to be your duchess, if you'll still have me. His smile transformed his severe features to something beautiful. Still have you? Matilda, I've just fought 5 duels to keep you. I'm not letting you go now. Then he kissed her, right there on the street. Scandalous, public, perfect. When they parted, she was breathless and laughing. What will society say? I don't care, do you? Not anymore. Rebecca appeared with a small bag she'd packed Tilly's things. Go on, girl, go get married. Mr. Hartwell emerged, pressing an envelope into Tilly's hands with tears in his kind eyes. Your wages, Miss Sims, and a bonus for the finest work I've ever seen. Be happy. By 2 o'clock, James's connections and determination had secured a special license. A small church in Mayfair, Francis as witness, Rebecca as matron of honor, a vicar slightly shocked by the haste but unwilling to argue with the Duke. The ceremony was simple, swift, perfect. Tilly wore her blue muslin, not bridal white, but it didn't matter. James was still in his morning clothes. They didn't care. I, James, take thee, Matilda. I, Matilda, take thee, James. The ring slid onto her finger, heavy, gold, real. I now pronounce you man and wife. Your Grace, the vicar said, addressing her. Matilda Sims was gone. Matilda Wood, Duchess of Ashcroft, stood in her place. It should have felt strange, impossible. Instead, it felt right. Within days, calling cards flooded Grosvenor Square. Ladies who'd never noticed Tilly now curried favor. Invitations to balls and dinners arrived by the dozen, everyone anxious to be in the good graces of the Duke and his unusual bride. Aunt Philippa sent a presumptuous note suggesting they let bygones be bygones. Tilly tore it up unread while James watched with approval. When Arabella, Charlotte, and Susanna requested an audience, Tilly received them in her drawing room wearing rose silk now, not grey, and was cordial but distant. They were deferential, calculating, envious. And they didn't matter anymore. The 5 men had all left London. Carstairs to his estate, Weatherby to Bath, Finch Hatton to Scotland, Delaney to a military post abroad. Lockhart disappeared entirely. No one mentioned them. James had made his point. Tilly found herself in James's study one evening. Their study now surrounded by books and papers and comfortable chaos. He worked at his desk while she sketched designs for pleasure rather than necessity. Easy silence stretched between them. This was partnership, not performance. "Do you know when I first loved you?" James asked suddenly. She shook her head. "That fourth visit, when you told me about the birds in Arabella's hem." He set down his pen. "You revealed that you saw people really saw them, saw what they needed to become, and I realized you saw me. Not the Duke, not the reputation, not the fortune. You saw the lonely man who wanted to be known, and I thought, there she is, the one I've been searching for. I think I loved you from the first moment," Tilly confessed. "When you said clothing should reveal character rather than conceal it, you were asking me to see you truly. No one had ever asked that of me before. Everyone else just wanted the product of my hands. You wanted my mind, my heart, my vision. How could I not love you?" Rain began against the windows like that first afternoon in the workshop, though now she sat in the drawing room of Grosvenor Square with James beside her on the settee, his hand covering hers. No longer invisible, no longer overlooked. She'd spent 34 years believing she was unworthy. Her family had told her so, society had confirmed it, her mirror seemed to prove it. But James had seen what no one else could: her artistry, her intelligence, her quiet strength, her capacity to truly see people and help them become who they were meant to be. And in seeing her, he had given her the greatest gift: permission to see herself as worthy. "Are you happy?" he asked. She looked around the elegant room, at the warm fire, at the man she loved beside her, looked down at her hands, no longer just tools, but also held and cherished. "I am seen," she said quietly. "For the first time in my life, I am truly seen. And yes, I am happy." He kissed her hand, her wrist, her mouth. "Good, because I intend to spend the rest of our lives making sure you never forget your worth." Outside, London carried on. Inside, the Duke and Duchess of Ashcroft had found what they both were searching for. Not just love, but recognition. Not just passion, but true seeing. And that, Tilly understood, was worth more than any coronet or title or society's approval. To be seen by the right person was to finally come home,